Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard. John, what's coming up on today's show?
Well, today we're going to talk about the implications of an interesting new development in the world of scandium, and I'm going to touch on FPX Nickel's metallurgical results, which are far more significant than the market gave it any credit for, and there was some recent results from Allkem with regards to its James Bay project, which also has some interesting implications for Brunswick explorations and its Anataka West lithium project.
So just what are the implications of Rio Tinto's purchase of Platina's Owendale scandium project?
Last Friday, on April 28th, Platina Resources announced that it had sold its Owendale scandium project to Rio Tinto for up to US $14 million. Platina will get $7 million US upfront and another $1 million within 30 months. And this is all subject to New South Wales approving the title transfer. And there's another $6 million US which will come based on certain milestones, which includes getting a mining lease. And but upfront in Australian dollar terms, this is about 11 million Australian for a company that doesn't have a huge amount of money. But since publishing a definitive feasibility study in December of 2018 for the Owendale project, it has pivoted to gold exploration, primarily focused in Western Australia, where it has a half dozen projects, and its audience has pretty much come to terms with scandium just being a dead end because of the chicken and egg problem. Now, the immediate implications are negative for the whole scandium world, and also in particular for Scandium International, which has the Ningen project, which already has a mining lease. And they were hoping that Rio Tinto would come knocking on their door when finally it gets the market developed for this aluminum scandium that it's producing from its Sorel Tracy facility. Now, just to back up a bit here, the definitive feasibility study that Platina published, it projected an after-tax NPV of 166 million US using an 8% discount rate, and it had an internal rate of return of 29% using $15.50 per kilogram for as the base case price for scandium oxide. And the capex was only $48.1 million, so the DFS cleared all the hurdles. And Owendale is an excellent deposit. It's part of a cluster in the Fifield area of New South Wales that emerged about 10, 15 years ago. Now, to back up even further, scandium has been a holy grail for the aluminum alloy sector for many, many decades. When you alloy scandium into aluminum, it makes aluminum corrosion resistant, it makes it stronger, it raises its overall melt point, and you can also, when you weld aluminum scandium alloy, the weld joint is as strong as the rest of the metal, which is not the case with most of the other aluminum alloys. But the very property, these properties that make aluminum scandium alloys so special are also a reason that there isn't aluminum scandium alloy all over the world. I mean, consider last year there were 69 million tons of aluminum produced that was worth about $111 billion. Now, aluminum's the third most abundant element after oxygen and silicon in crust. Scandium itself is in 31st place with about 26 parts per million. That's more abundant than lead, which is in 36th place with about 15 parts per million. And but yet lead is everywhere. That was a $10 billion market last year. But scandium, they estimate maybe 20 tons of scandium oxide were sold. So that's about 15 tons of elemental scandium. And if it was like $2,000, that's like nothing. That's less than $50 million. So how can something that's crustally more abundant than lead simply not be available. I mean, these properties that scandium bestows on aluminum, they stop improving at 2%. So the max you're ever going to have is like 1% of aluminum. And if you had this readily available, almost all aluminum products would be made of aluminum scandium alloy. So there should be like a market of 500,000 to 1 million tons of scandium oxide per year. And yet it's next to nothing. And the problem is that the very property that makes scandium special for aluminum, the fact that it's a dispersoid, is also a reason that it does not concentrate in nature. And when an element is a dispersoid, it means the individual atoms repel each other, which is why when you melt scandium into an aluminum melt, the scandium atoms immediately disperse, and then because they have a higher melting point, they tend to crystallize first, and they literally create a matrix within the aluminum that the rest of the aluminum then crystallizes around, and that's what ends up creating these properties. But in the geological processes in nature that create, lead deposits and that, it just doesn't do it for scandium. And the best we've typically seen are 50 to 100 ppm grades of elemental scandium in sort of iron deposits and in carbonatites, such as the Elk Creek project in Nebraska that NioCorp is trying to develop. And the Soviets, when back in the 50s and 60s, they mined an iron deposit in Ukraine called Softy Vody, which was about 120 ppm, and they just mined it to make aluminum scandium alloy for their MiG fighter jets. They didn't care what it cost; it was not commercial. But since the Soviet Union collapsed, this all became commercially impossible to use scandium for everything. But 15 years ago, there was big development in Australia, and that's where these deposits clustered in the Fifield area and also down by Nyngan, where Scandium International acquired the Nyngan project from Jerbois. There were these ultramafic bodies that had been explored for nickel, cobalt, and platinum group metals. These are laterized, and they found that typically on the margins of these systems, for some strange reason, scandium had ended up enriched. And the problem with the nickel and the cobalt and that, it did not end up enriched. So you ended up with these almost like a donut around on the rims of these intrusive complexes, where the scandium grade got into the 300 to 600 ppm range. And all of a sudden, you could see because it's also expensive to extract the scandium from this type of rock, but at $1,500 to $2,000 a kilo, you could actually make money processing this. And so there was a lot of hope, but the chicken and egg problem ultimately killed all the juniors that tried to do something with this. And the chicken and egg problem is that the end users are reluctant to commit with an offtake agreement to a supply for a material for a new product that they would have to market and develop in advance without any guarantee that when this whatever chemical plant is put into production to process these laterized scandium deposits, that they will actually work as expected. So it became this sort of dead end. The juniors couldn't raise, even though the capex was modest, they couldn't get the offtake deals in place to raise the capex, and everything kind of faded. And in 2020, we did get hope that the chicken and egg problem would get solved. And this came from Rio Tinto, which announced that at its Sorel Tracy facility northeast of Montreal, where it smelts the iron ore from the Lacteo mine farther up the St. Lawrence River. And it basically makes iron from that, and the slag, because this is a titanium-rich deposit, the slag would be about 80% titanium dioxide. They would sell this to pigment makers, but the whole pigment making industry has been changing to a different process, which requires rutile 95% grade as a feedstock. And so they were losing the market for this titanium slag, which was quite lucrative. So they were forced to upgrade the titanium slag, reprocess it, and purify the titanium dioxide. And in the process, they noticed that all the scandium that was in that system, the usual sort of 50 ppm that you find in these types of iron deposits, was reporting to the slag. And they figured out how to pull this out. And, my estimates are that annually at the scale of processing, they could produce up to 30 to 50 tons per annum. But this type of feedstock is not readily available. Mineral sands that have ilmenite in it, they don't have the scandium in it. So the hope was if Rio Tinto can develop the aluminum scandium alloy offtake market and get to the limit of its Sorel-Tracy supply, it would look around at some of these primary projects such as Ningen or Owendale and develop them to take it to the next level, into the 100 to 200 level. And with all the potential applications for aluminum scandium alloy, one could see this becoming a 1,000 ton per annum market worth $1 billion versus the sort of 25 to 50 million that it's worth now. And Rio Tinto's pace in developing this has not been huge. They are now, I think, building a 12 ton per annum output facility. So this news that suddenly they have done a deal to acquire Owendale, this is good news. This is a sign that they see promise that the market will get bigger for scandium. And they do own the Allkem aluminum division, and they can use this to help market their scandium division's alloy. But the price, when you look at what it was supposed to be worth to Platina, it was supposed to be worth 252 million Australian. They've sold it for 5% of that, and they are only going to have 11 million up front. And it really looks like a capitulation. However, one can also spin this, instead of like Rio Tinto getting a huge bargain, they may also have bought a lemon. Because in this Fifield area, this is a fairly lush farm area, and Robert Friedland's Sunrise Energy Metals, which owns the scandium-only Syerston deposit, very close to the Owendale deposit, but also the Sunrise Nickel Cobalt deposit, which it has made its focus to develop. The only problem is its numbers, 1.9 billion capex relative to NPV of 1.2 billion for nickel and cobalt as the primary outputs. That seems to be stalled. There's nothing happening there. They're looking for investors, but it isn't really happening. But long ago, when this was originally just a nickel project, all the water rights for the region were secured. So Friedland controls the water rights, which is why one of the painful aspects of the feasibility study done by Platina back in 2018 was that they had to truck raw ore 70 kilometers south to another facility where they did have access to water, and then of course truck the tailings all the way back and put them back into the hole in the ground. And that is like really convoluted type of thing. So these are problems that Rio Tinto will have to solve, and the fact that there's no real timeline to these milestone payments. The negative aspect of this is that maybe Rio Tinto does not see the scandium market developing as quickly as as one might have hoped, and that would of course be bad news for Scandium International, where there was a management coup about a year ago when the two largest shareholders kicked out the existing management team, replaced it with themselves, raised about $3.5 million to clean up the balance sheet and give them enough money to basically just nurse this project along as an optionality play, hoping that Rio Tinto or somebody leapfrogging Rio Tinto comes in and makes an offer. And the definitive feasibility study they produced back in 2016, that came up with a much higher, well, not much higher, but about 250 million US NPV and a 29% IRR, and of course these numbers today, who knows what they are today. But they actually have a mining lease on it, which Owendale never went after. So with a few more smaller sort of permits required, the Ningen project could be put into production at its scale, which was going to be 37 tons per year, compared to Owendale, whose scale was going to be 20 tons per year output initially and 40 tons per year farther along in its 30-year mine life. The Ningen project only had a 20-year mine life. And so the negative interpretation of this is, okay, one, Rio Tinto sees it's going to be a while before it needs primary scandium supply, and it now has Owendale, so it can plod through the steps, and it will have paid only $14 million US for title to this asset, which, by the way, the mining plan is a fraction of the potential in these deposits. These deposits have an enormous amount of scandium, and they have 200-year mine lives at the initial scales. So if scandium offtake ever did take off, these deposits could end up being scaled up. Now, there's another way to look at this, and I've been puzzled by Scandium International a couple of weeks ago. Instead of it just being pounded out at 4 cents from people giving up on the company, started creeping up. And the way Platina described the deal, it is not paying any finder's fees, had no intermediaries. So obviously Rio Tinto must have approached Corey Nolan directly and initiated discussions. And it's hard to imagine that they didn't also approach the Ningen, the Scandium International group. So what I suspect has happened is the asking price for the much more shovel-ready Ningen project is much higher than Owendale. And if Rio Tinto is actually seeing much more rapid growth in demand for aluminum scandium alloy than seems to be apparent from this deal with Owendale, why would they want to leave Owendale sitting out there, pay a much higher price for the more advanced Ningen project, and then perhaps watch Robert Friedland wake up and have Sunrise acquire Platina's project relatively cheap? And you can't really do much with the Syerston because the whole property is being permitted and for the big, large-scale nickel cobalt operation. But next door, he could transfer water rights and develop Owendale as a standalone type of a primary scandium standalone operation whose permitting would be separate from that for the Sunrise Energy nickel cobalt resource. So maybe what this really is a preemptive tying up at relatively cheap prices for an asset that was basically of no value anymore to Platina, had complicated water rights issues, and they chasing gold exploration in Western Australia. So for them, this is a windfall. They can go to work, hopefully deliver success with new gold discoveries. And Rio Tinto has this asset basically sterilized from Alcoa coming in there or anybody else. And if it really wants faster supply, we may yet see a deal with Scandium International on the Ningen property. And the original DFS, it's fairly small scale, but this could be the pilot plant to give them that extra sort of 50 tons per year that they need. And of course, it's all modular, so it can be expanded. So that's the potential positive spin for Scandium International and the scandium sector, but it can go either way, either like Scandium's not developing as quickly as everybody hoped, and they picked up this Owendale project cheap, or it is going quicker than we can see visibly from any announcements that they've made, and we may soon see a deal on at least the Ningen, a partnership to get this thing started, and that would be a very positive development for the entire scandium sector.
What does the latest news release from FPX Nickel mean?
On May the 3rd, FPX Nickel reported metallurgical results, which basically said that the DTR-based grades that it uses in its Baptiste mining plan have roughly the same recovery, whether the grade is 0.15% or 0.1%. And one asks, well, yeah, but that's what we assumed. Why does this require a press release? Well, the reality is that in most deposits, whatever recovery you use in your feasibility study, the recovery tends to be better with the higher the grade and lower the grade. So if you're front loading the higher grade stuff, which everybody does to achieve payback, and then in the later years you're mining the lower grade, yes, you're going to get less, let's say in this case, nickel from your future production, but you can get a double whammy of, okay, instead of a 90% recovery, you might only get a 70% recovery. So not only are you mining lower grade, but you're recovering less of what has been measured. And this is a problem for deposits that are hydrothermally based, where you have sulfides that you need to do flotation on, and if the lithology, the mineralogy changes, or even if the type of sulfide, say, goes from pentlandite to hazelwoodite or other forms, if these change within the rock mass, that can affect your recoveries. Now, in the case, what makes the Dakar project of FPX Nickel so interesting is that its flow sheet is entirely based on recovering awaroite grains. And awaroite is a natural stainless steel. And the Baptiste deposit is basically a chunk of basalt from the ocean that, instead of plunging underneath the continent, got shoved on top of it and then eventually squeezed and metamorphosed, and that caused the iron to the nickel in there, in whatever form it was, to bind with iron to create these stainless steel grains. And these are magnetic. So if you grind this up, you can pull these grains out along with anything else that's magnetic, such as magnetite, and separate it from all the other material. Now, the Davis tube recovery assay system is designed to, you crush your sample down to 80 microns, and then it measures everything that you can pull out with a magnet, and that becomes your grade. And in this case, it will not pull out pentlandite, any nickel sulfides or anything. It will not pull out nickel hiding in an olivine lattice. It'll only pull out the awaroite. But the problem that they faced was the initial grind is only to 250 microns. And then they do the magnetic separation on that, and they lose everything that would have been in that area between 80 micron size and 250 micron size. And so what they wanted to know was, when the grade was lower, such as 0.1% in the later phases of mining compared to 0.15%, would the recovery decline when you mine the lower grade material? And so they created composites from all the holes in the different phases and ran these studies. And the good news was that they all, at that magnetic separation pass, yielded 91 to 93%. And that sort of 7 to 9% that they're losing, that's the gap between 80 microns that's measured by the DTR assay method, and the 250, that's the first grind. And they, of course, then regrind it down to 15 microns or so to really, get the iron out and separate the magnetite. So this is actually, for any big mining company looking at a 40-year mine life on a large scale, 120,000 ton per day operation, this is actually good news to them, because the company's done the work that says, yes, we will know what the recoveries are when we mine the lower grade material. And this is really only possible because this is such a large homogeneous body, and the only real variation is in the grain size distribution of the awaroite, and that's the key. The lower grade, it's not necessarily that there's lower total nickel grade in these lower grade areas. It's just that the awaroite grains will have a finer grained distribution, and recovery requires this to be 250 microns or bigger to be recovered. So I think this was a very positive development. The market doesn't really know what it doesn't know in terms of when you get into all this complex mine engineering stuff. But I think this is another major step in having those potential future developers of Baptiste gain comfort that when the PFS comes out, that there will not be some gotchas in there because the mineralogy changes on you and the recovery collapses.
What is the significance of Allkem's drilling results at its James Bay project?
Now, the James Bay project, this started off, this was a deposit, the CYR was found many, many decades ago, and then around 2010 during the initial lithium wave, Paul Matizek's Lithium One acquired this project, advanced it. Then Lithium One got acquired by an Australian company called Galaxy, which advanced it further. And then Allkem, which is a producer of brine type of brine sourced lithium carbonates. It acquired Galaxy, and it's developing the Mount. I think it has developed the Mount Cattlin project, and this is another one that they are developing in the James Bay region. And they published a feasibility study in December 2021. It was an Australian type feasibility study, even though they filed it as an NI 43101 report on CDAR, because they are also listed both on the ASX and the TSX. But the Australian JORC reporting standards, they're way better than the Canadian ones when it comes to the exploration results and resources. But when it comes to economic studies, they are short on an awful lot of detail. And that report had like a couple graphics in it, one of the dot on the map of Quebec where the project is, and another a close-up plan view of all the holes into the pegmatite system that they are going to develop. And what was interesting is this week they published a news release updating on a drilling program that they had done, and the program had two dimensions to it. One was in the eastern direction towards Brunswick Exploration's Amatakal West project. The Galaxy had done a number of holes there, just sort of scout holes, and confirmed, yes, there is pegmatite going close to the border. So they've done a major campaign of delineating and infill drilling this to increase the resource, which is about 30 million tons of 1.3% lithium oxide. But they were also doing some drilling under the western proposed pit, and they realized that although this entire swarm of en echelon pegmatite dikes has sort of a northwest trend, at the northern end it jogs more north-northwest. And they reported assays from drilling about a 500-meter extension that's completely blind under 5 to 15 meters of till. And this has yielded excellent intersections of 1.5 to 2% lithium oxide. And so the resource they're planning to develop averages, the probable reserve, I should say, is going to average around 1.3%. Here they have a much richer area that could be the starter pit. So who knows what they will end up doing this. But the importance of this development is we are seeing the higher grades, such as up in the Patriot Batteries Corvette area. We are seeing this in this more southern area, which is closer to infrastructure. And it's there, it's blind. They did not report any assays for the drilling done to the east of the existing planned pit locations, because obviously the drilling that Brunswick has done has intersected, jutting onto their property, at least 300 meters of a similar trending and echelon striking pegmatite dikes. We don't know the assays yet. Are they going to be lower than, say, the 1.3% of the reserve assay, or is it going to be higher, perhaps up like in the so-called northwest sector that Allkem has just told us all about? There's another 4 kilometers of running room to the east. They do know that there are pegmatite outcrops in the eastern part, but nobody has ever bothered to check if they are the LCT type that would have a decent lithium grade. So when the snow is all gone in this area, early June, they're going to put boots on the ground and walk this property to see if these other outcrops are indeed continuation of this trend. And people have been thinking, okay, you drill this, you have an extension, Allkem is potential future buyer, but Allkem is already establishing a lot more resource on its property. So when will it want your piece? Well, maybe in the very, very distant future. So what was the point of drilling this? Well, now that we know that in this area, where the focus has all been on the original outcropping CYR pegmatite system, even better stuff is hidden under the till and swamp and all that. And it's potential, that property, that little Anatakal West property, is large enough to host the same tonnage footprint as what Allkem is already developing on its property to the west. So what looked like it was just maybe get some money out of Allkem, so you don't have to issue more equity shares to raise for further drilling. Maybe this itself could become the focus of a significant drill program later this summer. So the Allkem development was good. It gave us a lot more graphics and information, and they also published a map. It's stunning on their website and in their so-called technical report. They have no maps showing the claim boundaries. This time they published it, and they show they have picked up land to the north. They picked up land to the south. They staked land to the east. So Brunswick's Anatakal West is now completely surrounded, almost completely surrounded by Allkem property, and it's a sign for this other area. Everybody's sort of biased. Okay, we got to go north to where Winsom's Andina is, and where Patriot's Corvette property is, and that's far more remote and more expensive and doesn't have infrastructure. But this news gives a shot in the arm for the property holders in that more southerly area, where like Critical Elements has its Rose project that it's now pushing through the permitting cycle, and other little juniors like Dios Exploration are doing stealth work, trying to figure out where there is potential blind pegmatites, not far beneath the surface. Allkem coming up with this 1.5 to 2% extension of the system. I think that's good news. I think we're going to see a very, very busy exploration season this summer in the James Bay region of Quebec.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
I'm Jim Goddard. Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.